So as we add to our silver stack, let's talk a little bit about how the Canadian government is giving away, not giving it away, but selling it, but getting rid of all of its holdings of gold. This is something that's gone on. It first came out back in February, where they sold, I think, half of their holdings of gold, and then the story was updated in March, early March, just to say, well, now Canada's gotten rid of all of its gold.
Remember when we sold half of the gold? Yeah, we got rid of the other half.
Right.
Now. Didn't take long.
I've kind of saw it both ways. I saw that some reports had said that there's still 77 ounces, literally 77, where you had sold a couple tons, and now we're left with 77 ounces. I think some of the news outlets saw that and just said, well, there's no more gold, because who's going to count 77? But that might have been like a arithmetic error.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what we were talking about. It might have just been a mistake, because there's no reason that they would keep 77.
Right, and this is an important story just to show you exactly what Canada thinks from a monetary standpoint. Again, we're going to get into an article here that was in the Globe and Mail. It is an older article. It's from March 3rd. What I wanted to do was wait for the April report to come out, but we're already almost halfway through April, and I haven't seen any articles just giving an update on whether or not it's still holding that 77 ounces or what's going on. But this is a good article here. It's called A Farewell to Gold. Canada winds down its holdings. And again, too, this is from March 3rd. What I want to do is just read the article. I think it would be helpful and just interesting to go through this point by point. This is actually a very fair article. It gives some good historical information, but I think it leans in one direction more than another, and I think that we'll see that if we go through it. But let's start. It says, Canada's golden age is over, at least in a manner of speaking. I'm sure that took the author quite a long time to get to
I'm
that.
hooked. I'm sure you guys are too.
So it says, the latest report on the country's official international reserves published Thursday shows zero gold on the ledger. The government has been winding down its holdings of the precious metal for years, but this is the first time it has declared itself to be effectively gold-free since the exchange fund account was established in July 1935. So all the way back to 1935, this is the first time that Canada doesn't have any gold on its official government ledgers. And this is an important point that in this next one. It says, other countries still maintain significant gold holdings. So we looked at an article in our last episode, in episode 7, where we discussed the Canadian deficit. And that author was saying, well, all the G7 countries are similarly running huge deficits. Canada can't be the only one that doesn't have a huge federal deficit in their budget. But now we see Canada moving away from what these other countries are doing. So they kind of have it both ways. If we want to be, I would prefer if we stuck out and went on our own in having budget surpluses at this point instead of having no gold. But just in terms of what this article states, again, other countries, significant gold holdings. The United States, for instance, holds 8,133.5 tons of gold, according to the most recent statistics compiled by the World Gold Council. So the United States has the most. Next, Germany owns 3,381 tons. Well, the International Monetary Fund, Italy, and France all have more than 2,000 tons of the shiny substance tucked away in their vaults. So even countries like Italy and France, and I've seen also too that the UK, Britain, has quite a bit of gold. And this article doesn't mention it, but I've read some other articles just on the topic. They don't make mention that countries like Russia and China and India
for sure
are actually increasing their gold holdings while Canada's getting rid
of all of it.
Yeah, rid of all of it.
You can't even say decreasing at this point.
I know. It's cool. Just looking at what the other countries are doing, it's just kind of came out of nowhere. And I think it's going to make a mention here that it's been doing this for a while.
And sort of what surprised me the most was it seems like we just had the conversation that half of it was sold.
Right.
And then already we're having the conversation that there's no more left. That all of it was sold, and as the article points out, this is the first time in over 80 years that's happened, that there's no gold on reserves. So just the fact that it happened so quickly, while you have other countries buying up gold, just was astonishing to me.
Right, Canada's really kind of moving away, showing their hand. And the article just continues, Canada's farewell to gold is sure to perturb fans of the metal, but it leaves most economists remarkably unperturbed. So a little bit of an appeal to authority here with this next argument. And let's hear a quote from one of these economists. It says, these days, gold has no legal purpose that is required under monetary policy. And that was said by Ian Lee, a professor at the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University in Ottawa. So he's right. Again, it has no legal purpose. Gold, the dollar isn't backed by gold anymore. But what does that mean exactly? If it's still money but not legally backed by gold, it should make the sense that you still want to hold some of it. What's legal isn't necessarily what's right. It says, while many currencies were once backed by the precious metal, the link between paper dollars and gold has disappeared in recent decades. Under the Bretton Woods system that came into place at the end of the Second World War, currencies of most industrialized nations were pegged to the US dollar. The United States, in turn, pledged to convert greenbacks into gold at a rate of $35 an ounce. That system ended in 1971 when President Richard Nixon took the U.S. off the gold standard. So these are the great paragraphs. Again, it gives a good historical rundown. But also, too, is that where you're going to leave it?
Yeah.
Like, just leave it at that? Well, it was once backed by gold, but then Bretton Woods fell apart in 1971, and the dollar's no longer backed by gold. So it'd be nice if you got a little bit of opinion on this. It doesn't say why or what the result has been. But I think it's pretty telling when it was convertible at $35 an ounce just before 1971. I mean, now it's what, over $1,200 and hit as high as $1,900. So, yeah, that system has really hurt. And even post Bretton Woods, where the U.S. is kind of the mainstay, where people are, not people, but countries are pegging their dollar to the U.S. dollar. Again, now you don't have something stable backing even the U.S. dollar. But this is where I find the article gets pretty funny. It says, since then, so since the fall of Bretton Woods, it says gold has experienced wild swings in its value, rising as high as $1,900 an ounce in 2011, after falling to near $1,050 an ounce late last year. The metal has staged a recent resurgence, climbing above $1,260 on Thursday. A spokesman for the Department of Finance said the sale of the country's final stash of gold was not motivated by any view on the dollar or on the metal's investment appeal. The government has a long-standing policy of diversifying its portfolio by selling physical commodities such as gold and instead investing in financial assets that are easily tradable and that have deep markets of buyers and sellers. And then I'll just read this next part, which is very interesting. It says, Canada's official international reserves are still bulging with other assets. At the end of February 2016, the account held $48.6 billion in US dollars and $22.5 billion in other currencies, as well as other holdings. So there you have it. We're moving away from gold, the commodities, such as gold, and instead we're holding dollars, US dollars, and other currencies. So we're not even having gold in there, but now we're having other currencies which aren't backed by gold either. And also, too, maybe I'll just mention that it seems that they want to move away from assets that aren't fluctuating as wildly as what they're saying. But I mean, look at the dollar. Look at the Canadian dollar, for instance. Again, within the last 10 years, it's gone up to $1.10 in relation to the American dollar, then down to 68 cents.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, you want to talk about fluctuating prices. I mean, geez, we just had 68 cents for the Canadian dollar, and it's gone back up to, what did you say? I think it was 78 cents.
Yeah, it's approaching 78.
And that was in, like, what, a couple months?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Huge swings. And as you just mentioned, too, we were as high as $1.10 previously, so...
Yeah, and the thing is, too, when they say they want to diversify its portfolio into other financial assets, I mean, that's not diversifying. They're going all into basically currencies, and then other, like, I would assume stock market and other things like this, stocks, probably bonds, that type of thing. So let's just keep reading for...
Well, we can also maybe just point out, they say they have a long-standing policy of diversifying its portfolio by selling physical commodities. Well, perhaps maybe that long-standing policy is done because you just sold all of them.
Right.
At least for gold. But you know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, you sold all of it.
Right. And this next paragraph here, it just kind of... Again, too, we talked about this, how they try to take you out of the debate by sort of... Not shaming isn't the right word, but just kind of suggesting that you're not in the conversation and you're not holding allowable opinions. This is a funny paragraph here. It says, economists see little reason, so again, they're just framing it. You're not an economist. Economists know what's going on.
People who know what's going on, they're not worried.
It says, economists see little reason for a currency to be backed by anything other than the good faith of government. But gold's role in the monetary system continues to fascinate a vocal minority of investors. So that right there, again, that's just pure framing. Again, backed by the good faith of government? Like, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. Again, it doesn't mean anything. Why would you want something backed by faith?
Yeah.
I mean, and governments don't have any good faith backing. Just look at what's going on with fiscal policy and monetary policy. There's no support for a strong dollar. Anyway, it gets into this next one. Gold bugs, as they're known, include Ted Cruz. This is a Texas senator who's running for the Republican nomination for president. He has suggested that the U.S. return to the gold standard. So again, referring them to gold bugs. And is Ted Cruz a gold bug?
I was just going to say, yeah, one of the more well-known gold bugs, Ted Cruz, who...
Right.
Maybe they would have thrown Ron Paul in there or something. It would have made a little bit more sense to me, but...
Right. And if just to kind of get away from this article for a second, it was kind of a pretty savvy political move by Ted Cruz. I saw the only articles that I've ever seen about this gold standard connection with the gold standard and Ted Cruz was way back in the summer of last year, where I think a lot of presidential candidates who were keen and savvy saw that Ron Paul got a big bump in the 2008 and 2012 elections, and they kind of pivoted to try to make a move for those Ron Paul supporters. And I think that this gold bug and return to the gold standard was just a political play. I don't think he really understands what's going on in that regard. In fact, he, as I understand it and what I've heard, he didn't even attend the vote to audit the Fed.
Well, even too, let's just look at this election cycle, right? Have you once in any of the speeches that Ted Cruz has said or in any of his kind of writings or anything like that, have you heard him once say anything about the gold standard or going back to the gold standard? I haven't heard it.
I haven't either.
I mean... To be honest and to be totally fair, we do usually change the channel when Ted Cruz speaks.
Yeah.
But I would have at least at some point thought that we would have heard some sort of snippet,
right?
And or soundbite of him saying something along those lines.
And if you looked at Ron Paul's speeches from his presidential days, every speech he mentions something on the gold standard.
Yeah, exactly. You have your talking points. There's like 4 or 5 of them in every speech, and that was always in Ron Paul's speeches.
Right.
I haven't once heard it from Ted Cruz, but
right. And I'm just going to end this by just reading. There's only a couple more paragraphs. I think it's fine to jump to the end here.
Okay.
Just talks about some of the Canadian gold miners, but it ends. It's a trend that Professor Lee thinks is eminently reasonable. The gold story these days, and this is his quote, the gold story these days is about psychology and history, he said. It's not about central bank policy or economics anymore. So he's right and wrong at the same time. Again, the gold standard isn't based on psychology or history. It's based on just the fact that gold is money, and it came up through the history. It's not like it's not money anymore. It is what it is. But he is right when he says that central bank policy has no time for gold. So it's just weird that Canada would get rid of all of its gold so quick, and then now we're left with no gold. I mean, you better hope that there's no crisis in the dollar here, as China and Russia and I think even countries like Brazil are adding to their gold totals. Again, Canada just has none anymore at this point. I mean, it's helpful we have the gold miners, but I mean, it's probably not a very smart play to just get rid of all of your gold.
Yeah, and I even think maybe it was in that article, or I read it somewhere, I think our mining's down quite a bit.
Right.
So it's nice to have them, but that's becoming less and less reliable.
Right. So if you needed another example about why Canada is not on the right economic path, either monetarily or fiscally, I mean, every article that comes out these days you can critique in some sense from a monetary or fiscal point of view.
For sure. And I think that's why it's important that we sort of have these discussions is, you know, everyone sort of looks to the U.S. all the time, and, you know, you can sort of argue and make your stance on what they're doing, but Canada makes a lot of, in our estimation, a lot of blunders as well, or a lot of sort of the wrong moves at the wrong time.
I mean, if you want to just put it in perspective, Canada and the United States on this topic, the United States has 8,000 tons plus, and Canada now 0.